All right, we are now recording. This is the inaugural recording of In Between Rounds. I am Professor Marco Perazzo. Below me, I see the man in red.
Wait a minute, wait. I gotta put on my headphones. Hold on. Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Were those given you by the UFC? Was that part of the gift package?
Hello? Hello?
You are? Who are you, sir?
Oh, I am Nathan Quarry, fight name Nate Rock Quarry, creator of Zombie Cage Fighter, the most amazing comic book of all time.
And to his right, we have.
Are you gonna put me up on the screen or what, dude?
You put yourself up on the screen.
Oh,
You're
okay.
talking.
I can't see it. I'm Tim Carpenter. I'm a reader of Zombie Cage Fighter. It's the greatest comic book of all time. Former professional fighter. And I'm at my gym, Nakamura Gym, Chalfont.
He's got that's a cute. What do they call that? A Chinese shade? What is that? I'm in my basement, by the way. My ductwork needs a little help.
It's a paper wall.
Paper wall. Okay. It's kind of like your personality.
I always wanted to jump through one of those, like before a fight.
So I will get us started. Coming up this weekend, we have Jones versus Cormier. Possibly Jon Jones is being considered the best fighter pound for pound currently, and eventually might wind up being the best fighter pound for pound of all time. But he's got to get past Jon Jones. Nate Quarry, where do you see this fight? Who do you think wins? What are the what are the pros? What are the cons of Jones and Cormier?
DC is a tough guy to. You don't want to count him out. I interviewed him before the Strikeforce tournament, and he said he was so excited that he was an alternate, that he wasn't actually competing in the tournament because, as he said, those guys are really tough. I'm not there yet. And then he goes on to win the entire tournament. That being said, I asked him at the time, because he's such a small heavyweight, would he ever consider dropping to light heavyweight? And he said he didn't want to because the heavyweights were so slow, and it made it such a better fight for him. So he could circle in and circle out, and you can see that in his fights. He really controls the tempo well. But with Jon Jones, with so much reach and such a great takedown game, takedown defense game, it's going to be a tough fight for DC.
So who do you have taking? Who do you have going home with the title?
I got to give it to Jon Jones. I really like DC. I think he's a great person. Jon Jones has always been nice to me as well. I don't know why he has such a bad reputation with so many fans. But I think Jones is going to take this one. He always rises to the occasion.
Yeah, it kind of seems with Cormier, but also with Jones, that they kind of thrive in that somewhat of that drama that surrounds fighting their opponents and the BS that comes with it. I know a lot of people can get taken off their game, but it seems both Cormier and Jones relish the fact that they have this rivalry going.
Yeah, when Chael Sonnen tried all the trash talking of Jones and throw him off his game, all it did was make him angry. We saw how well that worked out for Chael. So,
Mr. Tim Carpenter, what are your thoughts on Jones versus Cormier?
Well, I think Jon Jones is going to destroy Chael Sonnen.
You are correct.
I also think he's going to destroy DC. But it's like Quarry said, I don't think DC's awesome, but his big advantage is his speed at heavyweight. But I don't think at light heavyweight it's going to be that big of a deal. I think a lot of guys are fast at light heavyweight, and I just, like Quarry said, I don't see him being able to get past Jones's reach. And also, he doesn't even necessarily deserve a title shot yet. If you look at who he beat Dan Henderson and Cummins. And Henderson's amazing. He's a legend, but he's basically a 185-pounder. He's 45 or something.
I think Jon Jones accused him of being 50.
Yeah. So he's 50 years old, just came off testosterone. He was, I think he was 3-1 in his last 4 fights. when he lost to DC. So it's like you can't ever judge compare Dan Henderson to Jon Jones. They're two completely different fighters. So you can see DC destroy a guy like Dan Henderson, but I don't think any of that's going to happen when he gets in there with a guy like Jon Jones. I think Jon Jones wins in the first 2 or 3.
By how do you see him winning it?
TKO.
TKO. How about you, Quarry? So you have Jones winning, but how do you have him winning?
Yeah, I would say probably a TKO as well. That reach advantage, 84.5-inch reach that Jones has, that's longer than anybody. And and especially as people try to break in, if you're fighting somebody like I always did, the guys that I fought were 6'4". I've got a 72.5-inch reach. I've got little stubby arms. So I was constantly moving in forward pressure. And Jones is so used to that he takes 1-2 steps back and he controls the whole cage. So yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of distance, kicks, jabs, crosses, wearing him down every time DC tries to step in, and eventually get him up against the cage and throw those spinning elbows that he likes.
Yeah. All right. The only guy that's given Jones any trouble really has been Gustafsson, who's almost as long as he is. So I don't think a guy as small as Cormier is going to do well against Jones.
So you guys don't think that Cormier's world-class skill set that he came into MMA with, the wrestling, isn't going to make it a closer fight?
No way. And we saw that with Chael, because Chael, out of everybody that I've trained with, has the best MMA takedowns of anybody. Better than Couture, Lin Henderson. But Chael got immediately taken down. It's a completely different world when you combine the reach and especially Jones' reach, the elbows and the knees. It's going to be a tough day for DC.
Yeah, he's without a doubt better credentials as in wrestling than Jones. But MMA, Nate knows this as much as anybody. MMA wrestling is completely different than wrestling. You know, the cage changes everything. It's easier to take people down off the cage. It's easier to defend takedowns off the cage for guys that are good at it. So I think that the cage kind of nullifies some of the differences in wrestling skill.
Well, and not because I like doing this, but I'm going to disagree with both of you gentlemen.
Why would you want to be wrong in front of all these people?
Yes, the 80 subscribers that this channel has.
Doesn't make any sense. Your mother's going to be calling you, insulting you in a minute.
So I think that Cormier has a shot, and I think Cormier will win, and not even so much because of his wrestling, but I think he really, and I think Quarry, you and I talked about this a while ago about what was driving Couture and Couture, wanting to be this high-level wrestler and not quite making it. And the same thing with Daniel Cormier, who was, even to a greater degree, a better wrestler than Randy Couture, making it to the Olympics, losing in the semifinals or whatever, and having that drive and that hunger. And I know he's got a young lion in front of him of Jon Jones, but I think that with the training partners that he has, he's getting just about everything that Jon Jones can do. He's seeing somewhat of it in training. I think the wrestling is going to be the difference, and the guy's just a skilled fighter. Going from being an alternate to winning that heavyweight Grand Prix in Strikeforce and beating some of the guys he's beaten. He's not going to come in intimidated. He's not going to be scared of Jon Jones, and I think he'll be able to make it a 5-round grind-out fight where he'll win a decision. That's where I got it.
Terrible.
Hey.
No way. You're crazy.
It would be boring if we all agreed on all this stuff. So
it would also be accurate, but.
So 2 votes for Jon Jones, 1 vote for Daniel Cormier. When we come back next week, we'll have a resolution to this. Now, moving on to the next order of business. Anthony Pettis. He is currently the 155-pound champion in the UFC. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't think that this guy was much of anything, but he seems to be either knocking out, jump kicking off of fences, submitting people that haven't been submitted in a long time. Like where what trajectory does this guy have at 155, and where do you see his career going, Quarry?
I just see it continuing to move forward. He's such an unusual fighter will do so many things that it just shouldn't work, but he's able to pull them off. The jump kick off the cage was just legendary. That was a matrix. And he's just going to keep getting better. And the way that he gets in guys' heads as well, because I think they're so intimidated by him, by his athleticism, his skill all the way around. And he's on a Wheaties box, man. They don't just put anybody on that.
So I didn't even realize that. Pettis is on a Wheaties box, another thing.
Yeah, and that's good cereal, too. That's the breakfast of champions.
What about you, Carpenter? Where do you see Anthony Pettis going?
If he stays, like, he's been injured a lot. Like, I think his fight against Melendez was like his first fight in maybe a year. So if he can stay healthy, I think he could be one of the best ever. So far, I mean, he already is. He's like a Jon Jones kind of guy. Like, he's destroying guys that are that have been established as like top 5 in the world. So he's if he can stay injury free and he can, you know, stay out of trouble and all that shit, because all the stuff that comes along with making lots of money, then I think he'll be considered one of the best of all time.
Well, I know neither of you guys have ever had that problem, so.
That's for sure.
So, who at 155 do you think is somebody that can either take the title from him or give or give him a run?
I don't see anybody right now. There's that tough Russian wrestler, guy that punches real hard, but I don't see him being able to really do anything that Pettis. But he's probably, I mean, he's the toughest guy. Nurma something. I forget how you say his name.
We'll get the nerds on the internet to let us know what the guy's name is.
Well, and this is one of the problems that the UFC has. They want to have so many title fights going on all the time that they run through all the contenders, and they don't let these guys build themselves up. If in every weight class the champion fought one time a year or maybe twice, you would have all these up-and-comers battling it out, getting ready for this title shot. But what the UFC does is they feel that title shots sell more than anything, so they're going to have a title fight every single fight if possible, and they're going to run through all the competition to where it's, okay, well, Jones has already beat everybody. Let's throw in somebody else that doesn't really deserve a shot, but that'll sell pay-per-views. I think it really cheapens the sport.
Well, if we ever can say that was the axe that somebody's grinding, but
I think it's kind of hard to cheapen a sport like fighting.
It's cheap from the get-go.
Like, you don't need any equipment to do it.
Hey, you just really pissed off my hooker.
Look at the people that are involved in the sport. It's hard to cheapen something like that.
I wonder if in any of these podcasts Nate Quarry will say anything nice about the UFC.
They branded themselves well. Hey, I have an amazing UFC belt buckle. I've got a vinyl wallet that they gave me. That is marketing, son. Nobody else would think about that UFC wallet. That's brilliant.
Man, talk about...
Nate, you don't like the UFC?
Big fans.
He's a big fan of the old, Bob Merowitz and Kron Gracie. That's when, those were his guys. All right. And not the last piece of business, but wrapping it up with some trying to stay current with what's going on. So I didn't even talk about Anthony Pettis. You know what? I don't even know because I haven't seen the guy fight, unfortunately. But I didn't think the last time I saw him fight, I thought he got fluky against Ben Henderson, and now he's beating the crap out of everybody. So
when he armbarred Ben Henderson in like 3 seconds, you thought that was a fluke?
No. When he kicked him in the face. So I'm talking about the last time I saw him was when he kicked Ben Henderson in the face running off the cage. So
you're not even familiar with the sport at all. Why? Next week it will be me and Tim.
Yeah. You
can moderate, but you can't talk.
Okay, all right, cool. It'll be someone else not suing the UFC moderator. So, moving on, Kron Gracie, the son of legendary Rickson Gracie, made his MMA debut in Japan, winning by armbar. I think it was 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes. Number one, Quarry, do you know who Kron Gracie is? Number two, did you see the fight? Number three, what did you think?
Well, from what I've just learned, he's Rickson Gracie's son. And he got his first MMA fight, which he won with an armbar in 1.5 minutes. That right there, that says it all. What more could be said about someone like that?
Right.
I did not see the fight. I am familiar with his work. that's a big load to be the son of Rickson Gracie, who is assuming the greatest jiu-jitsu player of all time. So it'll be really exciting to see where he goes. Hopefully he can stay healthy and get some good competition.
What about you, Carpenter? Did you get a chance to see the fight?
I did see the fight. It was, I mean, I wasn't, it went pretty much the way I thought it would go. He's basically a pure jiu-jitsu guy, and he even said, like, he wants to just kind of use jiu-jitsu in MMA. He doesn't really care about learning how to punch and kick. But, you know, his jiu-jitsu is amazing, and I think he should rack up about 20 fights in Japan before he steps into, like, you know, the real show like the UFC. Like, he shouldn't do like some of the other Gracies have got into the big shows with, like, you know, 5-0 records, 6, 7, 10-0 records. I think he'd be better served to get a ton of experience beating up Japanese guys and then step onto a bigger stage.
Yeah, you know, I saw the fight, and it looked like he was a not so, at least from the feet, not as good a version of his dad. Not that his dad was amazing from the feet, but his dad was really kind of a lot more purposeful, it looked like, with the way he moved around. I think you're right. You know, some of the stuff that you're reading where people are like, he's going to get destroyed if he, you know, when he fights real competition. It's his first fight. You know, we need to expect that there's going to be growing pains, and, you know, from you guys, you've kind of grown through your careers. Your first fight to your last fight, you're completely different fighters. So I expect the same thing to happen with Kron Gracie. If he wants to be competitive at a high level, he's going to have to box. He's going to have to learn his Muay Thai. Otherwise, he could have as many fights as he wants in Japan. He could be 20-0 with that same style, and it's not going to serve him well, because once he takes that step to the next level, you know, just that pure jiu-jitsu style is not going to win, especially with time limits and, you know, the cage and the way that works. So that's my feelings on that.
The counter to that, though, is how well Damian Maia's done, using almost pure jiu-jitsu the entire time.
He was better when he just did jiu-jitsu. He didn't start losing until he started trying to punch people.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, like, who was he a title contender?
Yes.
And what happened?
He lost, but he went the distance with Anderson Silva.
Yeah, he got beat up.
No, well, he also frustrated Anderson Silva to the point where he had a fucking breakdown in the ring, almost.
Okay, but I mean, didn't win the title.
But in that fight, he only used jiu-jitsu. Like, he didn't really. Actually, no, he actually hurt Silva with a punch at one point.
So there goes your point.
He did great.
Well, when can we get Kron to fight Sakuraba, and how many times can we get him to fight Sakuraba?
Yeah,
probably 2 or 3. So here's what I believe to be an interesting question is, and Carpenter, you can give your opinion, but Quarry this will be based in fact because you fought in the UFC. What do you think is the big jump from, say, some of the smaller organizations, and we'll just use tier 2, like Tim's familiar with, like Bellator, World Series of Fighting, those things, and those guys that would move from
Matrix fights,
CFFC, and moving into the UFC. Like, what do you think is the big jump for a fighter? Even the guys from Pride, a lot of them couldn't make that jump into the UFC. And maybe that's for different reasons.
I think the athleticism is one of the biggest things. You have to be able to go 15 minutes nonstop, and a lot of the guys just aren't used to that kind of pressure. And then you put them in the cage as well, which keeps the activity really high, and that cage is huge. So you're moving quite a bit, and everybody's skill level just gets a little bit better. So it's going to be a big switch for him to come into the UFC or a big show. He really needs to take his time. And I tell every guy that's an amateur that wants to turn pro, I tell them, look, man, take your time. Once you go pro, there's no going back, and the money's not that good anyways. Take your time to where you've beaten everybody at amateur that stands to be beaten, and then slowly make your transition into the pros. With Kron, I'd say basically the same thing. Take your time, man. This is not only your career, it's your life. And you're going to be doing some damage to yourself that can't be undone long term.
Yeah, if you listen to any of his interviews with his dad seems to be, you know, it's very important to him to not feed his son to the wolves, as he puts it, and bringing him along correctly. But what do you think, Carpenter? What would you suppose would be the big jump from, say, Bellator to the UFC?
Going from a smaller show to a bigger show is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's just kind of like if you were a Bellator fighter and you were, hoping to make it to the big show.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I think you're just insulting me.
Use small words.
Man, you're not as dumb as you look. But but if you were to, you've trained with, we've helped Nate get ready for some fights. You've trained with guys that have fought in the UFC. What do you think? Do you think that there's a difference between the athlete that's fighting in the UFC and the athlete that fights in Bellator or World Series of Fighting?
I would say maybe the better guys in Bellator would be competitive in the UFC, but I don't think many of even the champions in Bellator are going to like jump right in and be a champion in the UFC. Does that make sense?
So they are or are not?
What do you mean they are or are? I didn't say are or are not at all.
No, you said they're going to be champions in the UFC?
No, I said they're not going to be able to jump in and become the champion of UFC right away. You know what I mean? Like, a guy like Hector Lombard was like amazing in Bellator, and he's not necessarily hot and cold in UFC, but he's got to work his way up in the UFC.
Right, or like for Eddie Alvarez,
exactly.
Loses his UFC debut.
But just from going from a smaller stage to a bigger stage, one of the bigger things is getting ring time in before you get into a bigger show where you're going to be pushed. A lot of guys get into bigger shows with records that are like, 10-0 with all first round knockouts or submissions, but they haven't, they might have only fought 10, 15 minutes total in 10 fights. Whereas if you have a guy that's, 6-0, but he's had like 6 tough, unanimous decision wins where he's been pushed, I think that guy's going to do a lot better on a big show right away.
All right. Yeah, no, I definitely see what you're saying. So we could agree that it's definitely a step up from any organization moving into the UFC.
UFC's the best.
Okay. Now, wrapping it up, the elephant in the room, you can see it on my little banner here. Where's Kong? Where's John Fitch? Where's Brandon Vera? Where are the real big shots in this whole lawsuit? What's going on, Quarry? Like, what could you tell us, if anything, about what's going on with your life and your lawsuit with the UFC?
Well, it's a class action lawsuit, so we're just the named plaintiffs who are willing to stand up and say that we feel that the UFC is acting unfairly, that they've controlled the market. So we're willing to represent the hundreds and hundreds of fighters that, for whatever reason, either can't or won't at this point, or are worried about repercussions from the UFC. But you're seeing more guys that are wanting to stand up, and even some guys under contract with UFC that are wanting their voices to be heard. But we're really representing every fighter. So, and it's always funny to me. I was talking to Jon Jones a couple years ago when he first got the UFC sponsorship, which to me was just one of the most ridiculous conflicts of interest that you can imagine. The promoter says, Jon Jones, I'm going to give you X amount of dollars to wear my gear, which could be any amount. The promoter could say, we're blocking out all other sponsors. So they're basically giving the champion, the person that they want to succeed, a blank check. And I was talking to Jon Jones about this and telling him how unfair it was that a promoter should not be sponsoring fighters even in a closed circuit open market like that. And he said, oh man, nobody cares about that. Nobody said a thing about it. And I said, no, you just haven't heard a thing. Every time the fighters are for something that's against the UFC or against the corporate way of doing things, there's silence. You'll know when they're in favor of something because every single guy will go, oh, that's awesome, this is great. If they hate something, they won't say anything because they know if they do, they'll be punished. Their fights will be put on the undercard, they'll lose their sponsors, they'll lose their pay, they'll get cut, whatever it may be. So it's really standing up for the fighters that are still under contract and changing the market moving forward, opening it up so when people do realize their dream to become a professional fighter, they're actually compensated for it. They're not getting 10% of the purse with the 90% going back to corporate. And this is a battle that's gone through in every sport and pretty much every industry. It's just the way that it goes.
Now let me ask you, being one of the named plaintiffs on the lawsuit, kind of, yourself, Kung Lee, John Fitch, spearheading this movement, is there any down the road greater financial benefit if there is a settlement for you guys as opposed to other fighters that come on later?
That's probably something my lawyer wouldn't want me to broach upon, but I'll say that there's no guarantee whatsoever.
Okay.
So going in, my whole mindset to this is that I'm going to try and change the landscape of this entire sport. Whether or not I benefit from it, that's not my end goal. My goal is to allow these guys that are up and coming to live their dreams and to be compensated for it. Because there's nothing worse to, and we saw with like Tim Kennedy when he made it into the UFC after Strikeforce was bought out. He made a statement, I'd be making more money as a trash can guy, as
a garbage collector,
as a garbage man, yeah. And that's just the reality of it. And then you hear about Dana tipping $10,000-$15,000 to his waiter. It's the money's there. They just, because they've monopolized the entire market, they don't have to distribute it, and they get guys in these long-term, unbreakable contracts with matching rights or the Champions Clause, where these guys will never understand what the free market is. And you could have somebody saying, and it's funny, the guys that are speaking out against the lawsuit are the guys that the UFC has taken care of. You got someone like a Bisping or something like that, or what if I was to tell you, you may be happy with your salary now, what if you were making twice as much or 3 times as much? Because now all of a sudden you're on the open market and you got to have guys bidding for you. Is what Bellator proved with Tito and Stephan Bonner's. People want to see the fighters. They don't care about what the organization is. But the UFC just has a stranglehold on 90-95% of the fighters. And even myself with my likeness rights, if I was to try and get into another contract with somebody else for anything, well, the UFC has my likeness rights until I die, past my death. They could come out with an Evan Tanner memorial T-shirt if they wanted to. That's what they have, and to me, it's just such a ridiculous concept that somebody can own your rights, your likeness, and not have to compensate you for it whatsoever in perpetuity.
So now,
is there any way I could get in on this lawsuit?
Since he never made it to the UFC,
I mean,
the UFC never took a look at him.
I was forced to fight in a fucking Bellator.
In Concho, we fought in places like Concho, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, I had to. Yeah, dude, there was no athletic commissions.
Well, I mean, why would they need an athletic commission if you were fighting there? Yeah, Quarry, but let me ask you this: say, and hopefully you guys win, right? But even if you don't, is it enough to have peeled the veil back to let the public know and to let future fighters know that, hey, maybe you don't want to do business with this organization?
Well, I think that's a big part of it, and showing people that you can stand up to the schoolyard bully, that we're not afraid, we're not going to back down, we're going to stand up for what's right. And that's what it takes every time. I don't want to compare myself to Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King, but if other people want to do that, I'm kind of partial to Chavez. We're just trying to change the world and make it better, open up the market so the fighters can be compensated. So I've had so many fighters over the years. It's just that when the career is over, they end up with nothing. And it's a tough concept for a lot of fans to understand because they look at
Tim Carpenter can attest to that.
As a fan?
As a fighter that wound up with nothing.
Yeah.
Well, and
I want to get on this UFC lawsuit.
It's tough for a lot of fans to understand because they look at it saying, well, you guys are living your dream. I do that for free. I do it for half as much. It's like, well, go ahead. There's nothing stopping you. You can train twice a day, 7 days a week for 10 to 15 years. Start fighting in the small shows. Make your way up to an amateur title. Turn pro. Win a small pro title. Make it all the way up to the UFC. Fight for the title. Win the title. After 15 years of training and seeing that this is not a charity, that the UFC is profiting billions of dollars, if at that point that you win the belt in UFC, you can turn right around to Dana White and say, I don't want to get paid, I'm living my dream. I'm sure he'd be more than happy not to pay you. But my guess is, after you've put in 10, 15 years of work and you see everyone else around you making money, you're going to want to make your fair share as well. And that's what the big lawsuit is about, that we want to open up this marketplace to where the fighters are truly free agents. We're independent contractors who are treated like employees. And
Yeah,
that's
how do
just
they? How and is that the? I mean, I guess this is all in the public domain now, but is that the big argument? Because if you're an independent contractor, isn't the idea of that is that you can generate your own business, right? And
well, yeah. If you hire a painting contractor to come over and paint your house, you don't dictate to him what clothes he can wear. Well, you can't paint my neighbor's house. No, he's an independent contractor. He took a job for you, and you could have 10 houses you want him to paint. You can't tell him you can't paint anybody else's houses, and you have to wear my T-shirt. That's just completely against the free market.
right, unless you compensate him to wear your T-shirt and not do those other houses, right? Unless you kind of agree to that, where you say, "Hey, I'm going to sign you exclusively," which is what the UFC does. But then they don't. It sounds like they don't pay people enough to make it worthwhile.
Well, and if going back to the painting analogy, you would have other contractors coming in and saying, or other businesses saying, no, we want you to paint our house. We know you're busy. We're going to pay you twice as much. You don't get that in the UFC, as they bought up Pride, Elite XC, Affliction, WFA, WEC. They bought up all the competition, so they controlled the market.
And the government had taken a peek at them at one point, hadn't they? Was it the FTC?
My understanding is that's not really the case. They
Okay,
they kind of looked at them and said, yeah, there may be something here, but there was never an investigation.
gotcha.
That was something that my understanding is the UFC said had happened, and it wasn't necessarily accurate. I'm not overly educated on that, but that's my understanding.
And how about you, Mr. Carpenter? Do you have any thoughts on Nate Quarry suing the UFC?
I think it's cool. No, when's the have you talked? When's the last time you talked to Dana White? Like saw him in person? Not you, Marco. Nate.
If I was a CM, I'd say, you know what, man, this is just business.
Yeah.
Just like everything, every way that I was treated by the UFC, and that was something
Do you
that
feel
that
like
is
you were
always.
treated poorly by the UFC?
If you look at just kind of the attitude, I was speaking with a former UFC executive, someone that worked there who had left and gone someplace else, and they had told me the atmosphere at the UFC is, we're in the worst recession in 100 years. You're lucky to have a job. We might fire you tomorrow. And even if you look at the speech that they gave you before every one of the fights, you get out there and fight hard, you'll still have a job. But if not, we're going to fire you because there's a million people that want your job. It's like that doesn't build loyalty with the employees. You don't threaten your employees and then have them go out and perform well. They're scared. They're worried. Geez, if I have a bad performance, I'm going to get cut. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my dream. How am I going to feed my family? It's such a short-sighted thing. I see them stepping over dollars to pick up nickels all the time, and just the way that they treat the fighters with no loyalty. Just something as simple as when I was cornering Chris Lieben at the Palms, and he was fighting at the Palms, and he got to use the gym in the Palms for free. His corner had to pay. And that just seems so ridiculous to me that the UFC couldn't tell the Palms, give this fighter 5 passes for the week so his team can be there to help him cut weight, help him put on the best show. Oh, it's just kind of that nickel and dime little type of stuff that just drives you crazy.
But
And
like a lot of these organizations that were throwing a lot of money at fighters, like Affliction or Strikeforce or Elite XC, and I don't know what we would consider a lot of money, but seems like they were paying better purses. They're no longer here for one reason or another, right? You know, like as bad as you could say that the UFC treated people, they were doing something right.
well, when you're buying out your competition, that lends a big part to making that competition go away.
Yeah, but
And
also at the same time, you got to say they couldn't have bought them out if they were doing great. Like if they were,
if they were failing, why would they buy them out in the first place?
Well,
Just let them fail.
for the fighter contracts when they
buy
do.
up all the contracts.
Where would they go? If
Look,
Strikeforce,
if you're gonna interject logic into
Come on,
these
man.
things, Quarry, just go with it. So all right, so it was either so we can think or we can hypothesize, right? Postulate anyway that the UFC was like, okay, these people are going to fail eventually, or we could buy them now. So they said, let's not wait for them to fail where they have the possibility of becoming successful. Let's buy them out before they do and get whoever out. I don't know, but it sounds like you believe that they were going to be decent going concerns like Elite XC and Affliction and all these, IFL, all this other stuff.
Well, again, why would you buy them out if they were failing on their own? If I have McDonald's and Burger King is crashing and burning and they're not selling a single burger a day, am I going to step in and go, you know what, I'm going to buy Burger King for $2 billion? No, I'm going to let them crash and burn. There's no need for me to step in if they're failing. But if I want to make sure that I want to corner the burger market, yeah, I'm going to buy Burger King.
All right, guys, we are going to wrap it up on that note. Nate Quarry throwing stones like he's known to do. I appreciate you guys starting this show, the inaugural one. We will, as the weeks go on, we will get better and better, or possibly get worse. But regardless, we will continue to do it.
We're gonna do this every Tuesday.
That works for me. How's that? Does that every Tuesday work for you, Quarry?
It could be.
Every Tuesday. Right. Every Tuesday for the rest of your life.
Yes, in perpetuity.
Oh my God! I already gave those away.
Yeah, are we able to show Quarry's face?
I'm hoping that the UFC has some sort of internet filter.
All right. We'll
All right, gentlemen, thank you for being on. My esteemed colleagues, Nate Quarry and Tim Carpenter. Take it easy, gents.
Peace.